and they go, 5? You realise that it's unusual. And that's in 90 centimetres. Oh, right. So, yeah, it doesn't bother me. I just rather get it done now while I'm a bit younger.
You youngster.
Well, it's not going to be easier for me when I'm 70, is it? Yeah, I don't envy you at all, mate.
Still going.
So, Bob, I've joined a Facebook group called Queensland Rail Days Gone By. It's full of old railway men. And
I'll send it.
even though I just asked for that or link.
If not, I'll print it off.
Oh, no, I can just do it on my phone. I'd rather not print it. It's like hundreds of pages.
Thanks.
Can't get it in the Dropbox on my laptop at all.
Yeah,
It'd be unusual if they were clean
yeah, and most of their brass.
Before I could get into a link with another link,
processes.
and I couldn't get into any of these.
I usually get it like Dropbox.
Yes, that's what all their handles
But
are.
you can.
I couldn't even
Read it.
I couldn't even get in Ben.
I reckon that's all they're doing.
My body temperature's up and down.
Yeah,
It's not even coming up.
but they're
My thingy.
lovely men.
I know. Like, because you got different systems.
All men are the same.
I'm like, oh, I'll just
Yeah, good.
and squint it out. Yeah.
Come back.
We are live, councillors, just so you're aware.
Nice.
Didn't that go quiet? Pen, please.
I don't have one.
Can I borrow a pencil,
Yeah.
please?
Yeah. Well,
Morning, councillors and staff. We will begin our workshop with our item there, item 1.1. Are there any declarations before we begin? No? Item 1.1, the Heritage Reference Group update. Over to Mr. Parker.
Good morning, Mr Mayor, councillors. This report is to provide an update to councillors regarding the Heritage Reference Group that replaced the former Heritage Advisory Committee. I've got Officers Marcus Matthews, Tanya Stenholm here to present that report.
Morning, councillors. So this morning we're here to present about the Heritage Reference Group. So I've got a couple of issues to present on. Firstly, we've got a Heritage Reference Group charter to reflect our governance changes recently, plus a couple of new members of the Heritage Reference Group as well proposed. We're also wanting to talk about the site of significance, not just up the road from us actually, and also a prospective site of significance at the Araluen Waterholes as well. In relation to the Heritage Reference Group, the purpose of the group has been to provide feedback on matters relating to conservation of cultural heritage for the benefit of the present community and the future of the Gympie region as well. As part of recent governance changes adopted by Council, our group does not need to meet those same legislative obligations anymore, but still exists to provide heritage-related advice, and is made up of a group of community-based volunteers which have an interest in heritage conservation for the region. So we've proposed a new version of our Heritage Reference Group charter to reflect the new naming and to more adequately reflect the purpose of the group considering those governance changes. And that is a new charter, the first of which has been proposed in some 3 years, I believe. That'd have to come back to a future ordinary meeting, obviously, for prospective endorsement. The most notable amendment from that charter would be the appointment and an amendment of wording to reflect more accurately the discretion of the CEO to provide an opportunity for the reference group to have input into matters of heritage value and the function to reflect the purpose of the group, to reiterate that it has no decision-making powers and any decision matters would have to come to council for resolution, as outlined in the report. At our group's suggestion, there are two new members who were recently approached about being included as new members as members of this group, one of which unfortunately has had to since depart for health reasons. So we've only got Dr. Elaine Brown, who is a published author, historian and member of the National Trust, and someone else, the other person has since departed. So apologies, that happened in the time since writing this report to come up to council. Are there any questions on those matters specifically?
Any questions, councillors?
No problems. We'll move on to councillors to be advised of the recent removal of the dwelling house, specifically identified at 20 Caledonian Hill, which was the subject of some coverage, I suppose, in the local community. And prior to its removal, this property had never actually been identified for inclusion on Council's local heritage register or contained in Schedule 4 of the planning scheme or Council's more recently endorsed Heritage Places study either. A building approval for its demolition was actually issued in March 2020 and didn't require any approval under the planning scheme or referral to the Heritage Reference Group. And that was, I suppose, the reason that it did not come through planning, through our planning department. Any questions on that item?
Any questions, councillors? Councillor Deborah?
One of the things that it was brought up was that it wasn't on our heritage. Yeah. Now, am I right in saying the reason could be that there wasn't, like, when the funding ran out, that was where it stopped? So the report didn't include everything that perhaps should have been in our region on that report.
Sorry, Councillor Deborah, the funding for what ran out?
To do more. There had to be a line drawn because it would cost more money.
For the Heritage Register?
Yeah.
No, that's not my understanding.
Okay.
That's why it's not on the register. I don't believe it's ever been on our Heritage Places study.
I suppose for some further context, Councillor Devereux, it hasn't been included on our local heritage register, which dates back some 15 years, 20 years or so.
Yeah.
We did in the last few years, 2020 or thereabouts, engage a consultant to undertake an updated Heritage Places study.
Yes.
Which was to incorporate sites of significance from the old Kilkeven and Tyro Shires, plus to make up for some other typology issues that were potentially lacking in our heritage inventory of sites as well. We undertook, under the provisions of planning legislation and heritage legislation, periods of community consultation, as well as, I suppose, council laws and council staff throughout the region have a significant amount of knowledge about those sites throughout the region. However, we are reliant on others to provide us with some information from time to time as well. At no stage was that site, I suppose, outlined to us and included in the register. So that's not to say it shouldn't have been, but it wasn't picked up and included in the register at any point in time.
Because I have noticed, like, Lady Mary Terrace, for example, there are some beautiful places there, old places, and they're not on it either. And my understanding was that there was a cost involved in putting a heritage list together and so forth, and that was partly why it wasn't and those places weren't. Okay, what's the plan going forward then? To expand that list.
Through you, Mr Mayor, I think the plan going forward is as part of the development of the new planning scheme. Obviously, the drafting of that will incorporate some revision of our current local heritage position, and we obviously seek councillor feedback in how that should be drafted, or what the new planning scheme should have in it to reflect, obviously, the community's desire.
I think too, we also need to make the distinction between the local heritage register and then the Schedule 4 of the planning scheme. Gets a little bit confusing. The heritage register doesn't actually have any statutory weight under the planning scheme, and when the planning scheme was formulated for the 2013 version, there was a decision made not to include any houses in Schedule 4 of the scheme. So therefore, the removal of any houses, whether they're on the Heritage Register or not, does not actually currently trigger an application to council.
Okay.
It's only commercial buildings. So that was a decision of council, the direction at the time. You can obviously review that through the current planning scheme.
Wonderful. Now, we don't have someone on staff who's solely for heritage and looking into that side of things, do we?
No, we don't.
It's a part of another position.
Part of Marcus's role, yeah.
And what, is it okay to ask what percentage that might be
Yeah. So,
as a part of your role?
As part of my role, I would suggest somewhere between 20-25% of my role.
So, yeah, okay. Thank you. Yeah.
Just to expand on that, so it's obviously an exemplar of what we can do better or not do better up the road. So, but officers will need guidance. So, if there's well, there'll be the planning scheme that we need to look at, but there's a matter of whether is do we actually want to have controls on our private properties? That's one area. If we don't want to have them, is it a notification process? So we can do that outside the planning scheme process to say, we've identified a list of places and we can just trigger a notice to you to say that at least you know what's going on. So, but if that's the direction we want to head, we can make those happen. So I guess in the planning scheme in the first instance, we'll identify what the provisions are. And then after that, we can do a session with elected members to talk about general notification of a heritage, register that we can work on later on. So I propose we do it in that order so that hopefully we can learn from this incident so that we can make sure the right information is provided and the right kind of protection.
Can I ask what the time frame for that would be, so the public are aware?
Okay, so I'd say in the first instance, the planning scheme work will happen first, and I was going to say this for the next session. The planning scheme's obviously going through a process where there was a time frame given to get the first sort of draft out before the end of this year. I'm looking at that now saying, is that realistic? So, and that was discussed actually by elected members as well in different forums. So at this moment, I'm working, Tanya's doing most of the work, and Stan Helmberg, but I'll help where I can, and obviously the acting director, to come up with a new time frame that we say is what meets the desire to get it done quickly, but also balances the, obviously desire from all of us to get a quality.
Sorry, I actually meant with the heritage side of things and stuff, the end result, so that the protections or not,
yes,
the council wants to put in, at what point will that become a reality? The thing is, for the public, I guess it's like that, where a building went and no one had any idea what was happening. They were upset by it. It's part of our heritage. So at what point would that happen, if it was to happen?
So in answering that first question, depending what elected members want to put into the planning scheme, that will determine part of your answer. So if everyone wants to go a bit heavy and go into private, then that would be answered there. The second part would be, I'll speak to the team, but in terms of providing information and getting a register, we could do that, and I'll get a time frame back to you. I'll take that on notice, but I would imagine it's next year sometime.
Yes.
Yeah, and we'll try and. I would have thought the first half of next year we could do something, but I'll confirm with the team on what exactly the timing is, because I would imagine the planning scheme is up.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Councillor Warder.
I'd just like to ask a little bit of information on the consultant that was used. What was the consultant's role in the heritage listings? Was it just to work out where these houses are that are of significance?
Through you, Mr Mayor, just making the distinction count for the Heritage Places study that was done.
Okay.
Was the consultant's role, you mean? Or in the planning scheme formulation?
No, in the
places study.
Yeah, the place. Yeah.
What was their role?
Yeah. Were they sort of just from the history background, this house and that house, and their dot point? Yeah.
Yeah, so Councillor, we engaged a company to undertake that level of work. They basically developed citations on each of our sites of significance, some 250 I believe there are, and 202 sites of significance now throughout the region. They basically developed them on the basis of Borough Charter, which is essentially a best practice document to follow for identifying different levels of criterion for sites of significance. So they are heritage professionals, and they did that level of work after being engaged by us.
Just to add to that, their key task, the reason why we reviewed the heritage study was primarily to include the Western regions, which weren't included in our study. So that was their priority. But then we did also ask them to revisit that was identified in.
Okay, so the reason why I asked is because if they were to find out where these places of significance were, and they're consultants and they're not from the region, I'd understand they would have missed things of sentimental local value, but I guess they've put everything on paper of facts, historical facts, and then you guys have gathered that and probably used a little bit of local knowledge on adding to it, I guess.
Yeah, they certainly did consultation locally with relevant people about the sites of significance. They didn't just come here from Brisbane.
Yeah.
Further to Tania's point as well, we did develop a draft document that was presented to Council for consideration before a period of community consultation as well, before coming back for final rules.
I'm happy. You're on to it.
Yeah, Councillor Milne.
So I'm just trying to recall my memory, because I do believe that draft should go to that consultation because it was an invitation to try and get the public to maybe identify some gaps that were in there. I'm assuming we didn't get any feedback from that consultation.
Definitely, and through you, Mr. Mayor, to answer the question, we did make at any given time there are sites of significance that have either fallen into disrepair, burnt down potentially. There are new sites that have come up that we've been made aware of for inclusion, some for exclusion. All the new sites that were proposed to be included, direct approaches were made to the landowners at that time, as well as the wider community consultation as well. I'd have to take on notice how many submissions.
No, I'm not asking
were
numbers.
made.
No, but we did get some.
We did get some.
Yeah.
Definitely. Some in support as well as some objections.
Yeah.
Councillor Polly.
A question, maybe a suggestion. You just highlighted there seems to be two ways of heritage places being lost. One is it just gets totally dilapidated or burns down or whatever. The other one, it gets removed and sent somewhere else. So, like next door was, and I think of the Apollonian Vale Hotel. Nobody's complaining that it was taken from Gympie because now it's a really good destination down at Marine Point. So is that even an option that somebody could take, like the neighbours did here, take it and restore it? And because it will always be remembered as something from Gympie. It'll have a connection, and it hasn't just been lost.
Like the Apollonian.
Is that
They do still complain. Yeah.
Yeah, I know.
It is lovely. It is beautiful.
But, I mean, is it an option that somebody could take something away and restore it somewhere else? So it's not just, lost the matchsticks or white ants, but
It's better than
Absolutely, that is an option to replace. There is, that's not the preferred option, because there is some geographical links to the importance of the site. And if you were to talk to 99%, I suppose, of our Heritage Reference Group members, the option would be to retain on site where possible.
yeah, true.
However, it would be preferable to be able to relocate as opposed to demolish as well.
Yeah, but is that an option actually at all? That they could relocate and restore it somewhere else? Oh, it's a good idea, and only 1% want it, but can they do it?
I suppose it is a problematic question in some ways, but it is an option should it be proposed, I suppose, to try to attempt to answer your question.
I guess through you, Mr. Mayor, in the drafting of any future planning scheme, there would be opportunities for them to demonstrate or submit an application about what their plans were for that particular building, and then obviously subject to a planning process. If that's what they were proposing, it would be measured against a set of requirements, which would be dictated to us, through the workshops with you, with council, and then we would assess that application. Is it appropriate in that instance for it to be removed off site or not?
Councillor Freeman.
I've been around heritage for a while. Some people would argue that I are one. And I think we're missing the point partially here. What we're trying to do is retain the character, in this case of Gympie. I'll use Gympie as an example. and please understand it applies to Tin Can or Kilkerman. What we're trying to do is retain the character. So, as a heritage person, I've got no interest whatsoever in a house being taken away to Breen Point and restored. What I'm interested in is retaining the character of Gympie. Now, interestingly, I've watched over the years, it's very hard to list individual houses. I think it's almost impossible because beauty shouldn't be the driver, it should be other points as well, but it's perceived that it's a problem to house owners. And I know it's addressed here in your paper, but if you'd just like to talk to it, I think a much safer approach is to use a character area, and then any proposal to remove or to demolish or to burn down, any structure in that area should come to our attention, and we should be able to talk to the owners. So I think that's a much safer way to go, and a character area is relatively easy to define. I've said it before, it possibly could be areas that were developed up to World War II, or if that's too harsh, World War I. Well, it's 100 years old if it's World War I. Would you just like to comment on the, as I say, it's in here, on the possibility of using the character area principle rather than individual houses? It's a much safer way to go in terms of protecting people's rights and also protecting Gympie from losing what we all love.
Yep, through Mr Mayor, that's certainly an option, Councillor Freeman, as you know. I guess with a character area overlay, you do pick up houses that potentially have no character in them, and then putting regulations on them potentially unnecessarily. But yeah, it's certainly an option. And I think we're discussing that later today.
Through the chair.
The question I have is, if someone does own a property and it is heritage, on a heritage register of either sort, is there any legal power to ensure that they maintain that building to that standard, or can they simply just take a process of, we'll let it fall over and then I'll build what I want?
Through Mr Mayor, it actually depends which register that it's on. So there's a state heritage register, and then we have our local heritage register, which I said doesn't actually have any statutory weight locally. It has to be in the planning scheme, and we've only got commercial buildings in the planning schemes. But if there's a house locally that's on the state register, and I'm not actually sure there is any, then the state have stronger controls than council does currently.
For those commercial buildings that are on our planning scheme register,
Yeah.
if they were to fall into a state of disrepair that they effectively fell over, is there any, do we have any ability to say, no, you have to maintain that to a standard? Or?
Our current provisions are pretty light on, actually, in terms of heritage preservation. Yes, we only trigger an application if they want to knock the building down altogether, or if they want to alter the facade of the building itself. So that's really the only thing that we have any control over currently.
Further to Tanya's point, Mr Mayor, the Department of Environment and Science have, I suppose, the controls for sites of state significance. They do have some higher order controls, I suppose, so far as maintenance of those buildings is concerned. We have actually made approach to a couple of landowners through the department about maintenance obligations. But the state list is much smaller than the local list, I suppose, because those controls are so much more stringent.
So, through the chair. So, given that we have a session on heritage later on today, perhaps when we are able to hear councillors' views on that, we'll know where on the spectrum we sit, of whether it's higher control or lesser controls, and we can tweak that for both the planning scheme and our own local heritage provisions. If everyone's happy with that, noting that we've got notes from the session so far.
If we wish to continue on.
There is a little bit more to the report relating to a site of significance that Heritage Reference Group wants to bring to the attention of council, and that is for the Araluen waterholes. So that is a site of some local significance, and they have advocated for the retention and maintenance of those sites of significance, and they request that it be brought to the attention of council, I suppose. We have to have just a couple of key points towards the end of the report. There are some images there's a couple of relics, I suppose, on site for the Araluen waterholes, but of note, most importantly, is that the Araluen waterholes have not as yet been recognised on Council's local heritage register, nor were they identified in the recently endorsed PACES study. The site is currently owned by the state government, and there's actually a lack of practical roadway access for the ongoing maintenance of the site. So we just wanted to draw the attention to councillors that the Heritage Reference Group is advocating for other sites for inclusion, but that's probably something, as we've discussed, and the points made by Andrew previously, it will probably have to be considered as part of the planning scheme review process. That is one of, I believe, we've got about 7 requests in at the moment for new sites for inclusion on a local heritage register, but we're just wanting to draw your attention to that, I suppose.
Is there any feedback councillors wish to give in relation to that? I believe it may have been a waterhole that you swam in during the mining days. Councillor Fred?
It's quite acidic, Mr Mayor, bad for your hair.
Yes, Any comments, Councillor Devereux?
Yeah, thank you. Through the mayor, I have actually been to the Araluen waterhole. A couple of guys from...
Clearly you haven't swum in it.
No, I did not. I did not. Yeah, they took me, to get to it, we had to stop on the highway. We had to go across the highway, jump over a barrier, and then go through a bit of scrub. But what was in there was fascinating. And that was just the monument type things that are there, the plaques. The history of the waterhole is significant to the early days of our area. I was wondering, as far as access is concerned, I was kind of surprised why it wasn't included with one of the parcels around it, given that some point the forestry and all that there. Perhaps that could be solved in that manner, but I don't know what would be involved either way. While looking at this, I did find out that the oval there, which I've always thought could be used by locals in this period where we've got a bit of a shortage, that is part of the unit type things, or whatever they're called there, isn't it? The oval itself is part of that structure?
Yes. The old forestry complex. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So, I don't know why it was parcelled off from that, but yeah, that's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Any other comments, councillors? Is there anything you need?
Yeah, through you, Mr Mayor. Just the report there is, I guess, seeking council direction about, for staff, whether or not they wish to pursue, negotiations about purchasing that land from state government or taking control of that land from state government, and establishing legal tenure over that site. Sorry. I just wonder whether there's any direction from council about
I don't think.
Whether we.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
I think if it's obviously good to understand what the state are looking for or what they're willing to give us to maintain it. That would be, if those inquiries are made to get an understanding, that would be appreciated.
And we could bring that back to council again. Yep. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments, councillors? Councillor Devereux?
Thank you. Through the mayor, it would make more sense to me to have it recognised at least by the state if it's something that they would consider doing, not necessarily to take it over and have to maintain it for ourselves. I just would hate to see that extra expense that we'd have then. Thank you.
Anything else, councillors? Thank you, staff. This concludes our workshop for today. I don't believe we need to break for a cup of tea before we